Hello, and welcome back to ZenithTech. We're here today with another How to Pick Your Computer Components video. Today we're going to be covering the motherboard and the RAM. The first half of the video is going to be covering the motherboard and the different types of compatibilities you need to look for in your system that you're going to be building. And the second half is going to be covering the RAM. The RAM is going to be a much shorter section because there's not a whole lot to look into. So today we're going to be talking about motherboards, but if you haven't picked out your processor already, please go check out our video on how to pick your CPU up in the little eye. Picking out your processor or your CPU, your central processing unit, is one of the harder decisions that you have to make, especially depending on your budget. And, well, without your processor, you're not going to know which motherboard series that you're going to need to go with. So let's get into how to pick your motherboard. First, start with the chipset. If your chipset, say I picked my processor as the i7-6700K, for instance, I would need to choose a compatible motherboard that has a chipset that matches up with the CPU. In this case, the Z170 chipset. In my system, I had the 5820K as my processor, so I had to pick the X99 chipset motherboards. So based off the chipset that your CPU needs, you need to pick a motherboard within that category or that has that chipset. So that'll narrow down your choices of motherboard quite substantially. After you go and pick out the chipset, go and look for the form factor that you're looking for. Are you looking for a big honkin' computer with an XL-ATX motherboard that has tons and tons of ports, or are you looking for something a little bit more simple, like a mini ITX rig to run your HD PC off of? Mini ITX is the smallest form factor. Then there's micro ATX, which is slightly larger. Typically it has one more PCI slot than the mini ITX. Then you move up into the ATX. ATX is standard form factor, so 4 to 5 PCI Express lanes, pretty general sizing of the motherboard, and then you move up into the XL-ATX or the eATX. eATX is slightly wider, I believe, and XL-ATX is slightly longer, so more PCI Express either lanes or storage or any number of devices you can put in there. Now that you have your form factor picked out, make sure that whatever motherboards you're looking into are within the budget that you're looking at. So if you have, say, a $200 processor, you should be looking for motherboards within the range of 80 to like 120 bucks. Without the motherboard, the rest of your system, you can't have a rest of your system. Without the motherboard being solid and very stable, the rest of your system is also going to suffer a lot of inconsistency and instability over time. Now that you've narrowed down your budget, it's all about the ports. The motherboard is how the CPU and the graphics card interact with everything else in your system. So, does it have enough USB ports for you? Maybe you have like 4 or 5 keyboards hooked up to one computer at the same time, or you have multiple mice hooked up to the same computer, or you have loads of different controllers or amps and DACs, and there are a lot of things that you connect via USB. So you need to make sure that whatever motherboard you're looking for has the compatibility that you need. Then look into SATA. How many SATA drives are you planning on having? Are you planning on having 2 hard drives, or are you planning on having 6 and running a RAID 10 array or something? How many SATA ports do you need, and does your motherboard at least have that many? Now, some motherboards nowadays have SATA Express. SATA Express is a new, a new storage media. However, I haven't seen any particular drives that use SATA Express. I know there are some adapters to SATA Express, but essentially it's a storage connection that I have not seen on a lot of storage devices yet. So you can actually use 2 of those SATA ports that are in the one SATA Express connector as plain SATA ports, and that would work fine for you. Next, does it have enough audio ports? If you don't run a DAC like I do, you're going to need audio ports. So does it have the inputs and the outputs that you're looking for to run your speaker system or headphones or microphones even, because mic inputs are also on the back. And then lastly, does it have enough RAM support? So some motherboards can support 64 gigs, some can support 128, some can only support 32 gigabytes, that is. Types of RAM compatibility when it comes to motherboards. There is dual slot or dual channel and quad channel. Quad channel is reserved for the X99 or the X79 or any of the quote-unquote enthusiast grade platforms that Intel has. However, the dual channel is used by almost every other motherboard. Dual channel means that 2 sticks of RAM, if you buy them together, they are compatible with dual channel mode. You plug them into the same colored slots on the motherboard, and they will get slightly increased performance, which is always a great thing, because I mean, who doesn't like free performance? You buy your components and you overclock them for more free performance, and it's great. The last part, does it have the general color scheme that you're looking for? Are you looking for a white motherboard? Are you looking for a motherboard that has RGB LEDs on it? Are you looking for a motherboard that's blue or red or yellow? Take your pick of colors, because there are a substantial amount of motherboards out there, and you can be pretty picky in which color scheme you're looking for. And if you're not looking for a particular color scheme, or you are looking for a particular color scheme and you can't find it, there are plenty of just plain black motherboards. I know many companies make a slightly more budget-friendly version of their motherboards that is almost entirely black. So in conclusion, the compatibilities that you need to look for when you're picking out your motherboard are chipset compatibility with your CPU, your form factor compatibility with whatever size system you're looking to build, budget compatibility, so how expensive it is based on what your budget is and what your scope is, and how many ports do you need? How many USB ports? How many SATA ports? What kind of audio solution do you want? And does it have enough RAM support for you? Are you going to run out of ports on this board? Do you think you're going to have this board for 5 or 6 years? And how much upgrading do you plan on doing? And then the last one is just general color scheme. Does it look nice to you? And do you think that it's going to fit the general color scheme of your build quite well? So picking your RAM is a little bit different than picking your motherboard. Picking your RAM, you can go as budget or as high-end as you like, but the benefits aren't going to be nearly as dramatic. As long as you pick a stable set of RAM built by a reliable manufacturer, you're probably not going to have any issues. Now, there are 2 different types of RAM, at least currently on the market. There are other older types, but I'm not going to cover those in this video because I haven't personally seen a system running off of those older standards in a very long time. So the older standards are DDR or DDR1, DDR2, and the more recent standards that are used on most motherboards nowadays are DDR3 and DDR4. DDR3 is for, say, the Z97 chipset. The Z97 chipset only can use DDR3. However, the X99 chipset can run off DDR4. The Z170 chipset can actually run off of both, and the AMD chips primarily run off DDR3. Now, it is an iterative step forward from DDR3 to DDR4. There are some improvements, such as better power consumption, higher rated speeds, and larger capacities available once manufacturers fine-tune the process. However, in general use case scenarios such as gaming, light processing, surfing the internet, that type of thing, you're not going to see too much of a difference between DDR3 and DDR4. You are going to see a significant increase in performance, though, if you do any video editing, media creation, or 3D content, because the higher speeds are going to really impact, at least from my experience, they have had some very significant impacts in the timeline rendering and how fast I can scrub through the timeline and how immediate that playback is. So in terms of capacity, what type of RAM do you need and how much RAM do you need it? Well, the what type of RAM is something that we just covered, but how much do you need? That's a different question. And having more RAM, or downloading more RAM as it's commonly known on the internet, it's something that not everybody looks into because it doesn't increase performance all that much. 4 gigabytes is the minimum standard that I think any rig should have nowadays. Any computer system at all should have minimums of 4 gigs of RAM. So in terms of capacity compatibility, 4 gigabytes is the minimum I think any system, any modern system should have in it. 8 gigabytes is kind of a luxury if you have the money for it, if your budget allows for 8 gigabytes. Getting 2 4 gigabyte sticks makes a lot of sense, because it just allows you to have a few more tabs open. It allows your entire system experience to be a little bit smoother. 16 gigabytes plus, so 16, 32, 64, 128, anything above 16 well, anything above 8 gigabytes really is for content creators, media creators, 3D rendering. It's for servers and that type of thing. It's not really for the average consumer. Now, 16 gigabytes, I mean, anybody can have more RAM. But once you get past 8 gigabytes, you're going to start seeing performance. The performance per dollar that you get out of the RAM is going to significantly decrease. Now, as a content creator, I use a lot of RAM. When I am rendering through a video or editing things in Adobe Premiere or After Effects, I use almost all of my RAM every time. And stepping up to 32 gigs, I would still probably use all of my RAM while I'm working on these projects, but that's because I'm a media creator. If you're playing games, if you're watching videos online, if you're streaming Twitch, you're probably not going to use all that much. And now on to speed. The speed of the RAM is something that's a hotly contested topic between the cast latency and the frequency. Essentially, you want to optimize the two. So you want the lowest cast latency possible at the highest frequency possible, especially for media creators. If you're not a media creator, if your system is built for gaming and general consumption, buy essentially like the most basic set of RAM that you can. If you'd like to upgrade to higher speeds, it will help in some very particular scenarios, but it won't help all that much. So if you buy DDR4 2133 at a 15 or 16 cast latency, that's probably going to be fine. However, as a media creator, if you are... And the last compatibility that you should really look into when you're looking into RAM is, does it match your motherboard and other components? So does it look good? Does it fit? Does it interfere with your CPU heatsink? A lot of CPU heatsinks, at least the air coolers, can overlap the RAM slots quite substantially, like you can see in my rig. So you need to make sure that the RAM that you get is low profile enough for your CPU heatsink. As long as it matches your motherboard and it is the right type of RAM, DDR3 versus DDR4, you're good to go. In conclusion, with your RAM, the compatibilities you need to look for: does your motherboard support DDR3 or DDR4? And what kind of speeds does it support? Does it support the speed of RAM that you found that fits best within your budget? And is there any other RAM that's at a higher speed but roughly the same price? Make sure that you optimize your cast latency versus frequency. Cast latencies between 9 and 14 or 15 are roughly average. So if you can find something in that range, that's pretty good. And optimize your speed as fast as you can for whatever your budget's allowing. Now, the speed of the RAM, again, doesn't affect all workloads. It only affects media creators. If you're just a general consumer looking to build a computer or a gamer, make sure that you buy the most value-optimized RAM that you can, because you need to put that money into, say, your graphics card, or maybe some extra fans to make it cooler or run more quietly. Either way, you should put that money somewhere else and not into the RAM. The RAM is important. You need to make sure that you get it, but it's not a big deal. And the last thing that you need to look into is just, does it match your other components? Does it look good? Does it fit within the system? And does it impact the height that you have to choose for your CPU heatsink? So thank you for watching our overview of how to pick your motherboard and your components. I hope you found it helpful. If you did find it helpful, please hit that like button. If you didn't find it helpful, hit that dislike button and let us know in the comments what else you would have liked to hear about, what other types of compatibilities, what other types of information you would like us to share with you in future videos, say in the graphics card version of this series. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed. We'll catch you in the next one. See ya.